The calendar turned to November 1st, 1992. A faint chill clung to the air in the quartier chic of Antibes, a town usually bathed in the golden light of the Côte d'Azur. But tonight, as dusk descended, shadows lengthened, mirroring the darkness that was about to engulf Eric Devriès. Eric, a man teetering on the edge of 35, pushed open the wrought iron gate of his villa. He wasn't the robust, carefree soul he once was. The past few months had been a relentless cycle of hospital stays, diagnoses whispered in hushed tones, and the gnawing fear of an uncertain future. He glanced back at the imposing stone facade, a silent testament to the wealth and privilege that had both defined and, in a way, imprisoned him. His fingers brushed against the cold metal of the bicycle frame. He hadn't ridden in weeks, perhaps months. The machine felt foreign beneath him, a relic of a life he was struggling to reclaim. But the doctors had urged him to exercise, to find moments of peace, to reconnect with the world beyond the sterile walls of the hospital. Unbelayed, they'd said, their voices tinged with an optimism he found hard to share. A ride will clear your head. Do you good, Eric? He swung his leg over the seat, the familiar motion bringing a faint flicker of something akin to hope. This ride, he told himself, wasn't just about physical health. It was about mental escape, about pushing back against the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume him. Eric pushed off, the tires crunching softly on the gravel driveway. He pedaled slowly at first, his muscles stiff and protesting. As he gained momentum, he felt a tentative sense of release. The crisp air filled his lungs, and the lights of Antibes twinkled in the distance that he turned onto the main road, joining the evening traffic. Cars swished past, their drivers oblivious to the turmoil churning within him. He tried to focus on the rhythm of his pedaling, on the sights and sounds around him, on anything but the anxieties that clung to him like a second skin. He veered off the main thoroughfare, seeking the quieter streets of the town's center. The air grew cooler, and the scent of the sea mingled with the aroma of freshly baked bread emanating from a nearby boulangerie. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sensory details wash over him. He was, for a fleeting instant, at peace, but as he turned down a narrow, dimly lit lane, a sense of unease settled over him. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, distorted shadows. He glanced over his shoulder, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He heard the unmistakable sound of a car accelerating behind him. The engine roared, growing louder with each passing second. He instinctively tightened his grip on the handlebars, his heart pounding in his chest. He tried to pedal faster, but his legs felt heavy and unresponsive. He heard a screech of tires, a sickening thud, and then, nothing. A blinding white light exploded in his mind, followed by an all-consuming darkness. Eric Devriès lay motionless on the cold asphalt, his body broken and bleeding. The car that had struck him vanished into the night, leaving behind only silence and the faint scent of burning rubber. Everyone who found him assumed it was a tragic accident, a hit-and-run perpetrated by a reckless driver. A senseless act of violence that had snuffed out a life. The police investigation, hampered by a lack of witnesses and evidence, quickly stalled. But what Eric, in his final moments of consciousness, couldn't have known was that his demise wasn't random. For months, he had been an unwitting pawn in a meticulously crafted conspiracy, a deadly game orchestrated by someone he trusted, someone who craved his wealth and was willing to stop at nothing to obtain it. A trap was about to close, a trap baited with greed, deception, and the chilling absence of human compassion. Before we delve deeper into this harrowing tale of horror, let's take a moment to talk about our sponsor, NordVPN. In today's digital age, protecting your online privacy is more crucial than ever. NordVPN, short NordVPN at integration approximate 1 minute. To truly understand the events that unfolded on that fateful November night, we must rewind the clock and trace the life of the woman who masterminded Eric's downfall, Geneviève Montillet. Geneviève was born in 1945, a year of hope and rebuilding after the devastation of World War II. But her own beginning was far from auspicious. Abandoned by her biological parents shortly after birth, she was thrust into the impersonal and often brutal world of the French foster care system. She remembers little of those early years, just fragmented images, cold, sterile rooms, the metallic tang of disinfectant, and the constant, gnawing hunger for affection. She bounced from one foster home to another, each placement leaving her feeling more isolated and unwanted. The memories that lingered most vividly were those of the douches Freud's, the icy cold showers administered as punishment for infractions she barely understood. She remembers the sting of the water on her skin, the humiliation of being stripped bare and exposed to the harsh, unyielding gaze of the caregivers. She learned early on that she was an inconvenience, a burden to be tolerated rather than cherished. This realization fostered a deep-seated resentment, a simmering rage that would fester beneath the surface for years to come. Around the age of 4, Genevieve's fortunes took an unexpected turn. She was adopted by a wealthy couple, Henri and Madeleine Dubois, who seemed to offer her the love and stability she had always craved. Henri was a successful businessman, and Madeleine a refined socialite. They lived in a grand villa overlooking the Mediterranean, a world away from the bleak orphanages and cramped foster homes of Genevieve's past. Suddenly, Geneviève was surrounded by luxury. She had her own room, filled with dolls and toys. She wore beautiful clothes and ate gourmet meals. She attended the best schools and took riding lessons at a prestigious equestrian club. Henri and Madeleine showered her with attention, perhaps overcompensating for the years of neglect she had endured. They indulged her every whim, buying her expensive gifts and lavishing her with praise. But beneath the veneer of affection, a subtle form of emotional manipulation was at play. Henri and Madeleine seemed to view Geneviève as a project, a blank slate upon which they could imprint their own desires and expectations. They subtly discouraged her from talking about her past, as if it were a stain that could tarnish their perfect family image. Geneviève quickly learned that her worth was tied to her ability to please her adoptive parents. She became adept at reading their moods, anticipating their needs, and conforming to their expectations. She suppressed her own emotions and desires, becoming a chameleon who could adapt to any social situation. As she grew older, Geneviève developed a keen awareness of the power of money and status. She observed how Henri and Madeleine were treated with deference and respect by those around them, and she came to believe that wealth was the key to happiness and security. But beneath the polished surface, the scars of her early childhood remained. The resentment and rage she had suppressed for so long continued to simmer, fueling a growing sense of entitlement and a relentless pursuit of material possessions. In high school, Geneviève met René Desmoulins, a charming and intelligent classmate. They fell deeply in love, drawn together by a shared sense of idealism and a desire to make a difference in the world. René, unlike Geneviève, came from a modest background. His father was a teacher, and his mother a nurse. He valued hard work, honesty, and compassion. He was everything Geneviève was not, and perhaps that was part of the attraction. They married shortly after graduation and started a family. To their surprise and delight, they were blessed with twins, Fabrice and Valerie. Geneviève embraced motherhood, but her obsession with appearances and material possessions intensified. She insisted on dressing her children in designer clothes, not for their comfort or pleasure, but to impress other mothers at the park. She scoffed at families who lived in smaller houses or drove less expensive cars. She seemed determined to prove that she had risen above her humble origins and achieved the pinnacle of success. René, increasingly disillusioned by Genevieve's materialism, tried to reason with her. He reminded her of the values they had once shared, of the importance of kindness and compassion. But his words fell on deaf ears. Geneviève would retort, her eyes gleaming with a cold, hard light. Money buys happiness. And without it you are nothing. René earned a decent living as an executive at a local bank, and Geneviève continued to receive a generous allowance from her adoptive parents. But for Geneviève, it was never enough. She craved more, always more. Then, the unexpected happened. Henri and Madeleine Dubois, disillusioned with Geneviève, gradually stopped paying for her. Suddenly, Geneviève faced the reality of her greed. She was out of money and soon to be destitute. Desperate to maintain her lavish lifestyle, Geneviève began to engage in increasingly risky and unethical behavior. She took on odd jobs, working as a secretary during the day and cleaning hotel rooms at night. But the money she earned was barely enough to cover the bills. Geneviève started to embezzle money from her employers. She falsified expense reports, pocketed cash payments, and even opened a secret bank account in her children's names. Her schemes were eventually discovered, and she was fired from one job after another. But Geneviève was undeterred. She simply moved on to the next opportunity, always looking for a way to get rich quick. She even involved her children in her petty crimes, manipulating them into stealing from neighbors and even their own father. She told them that it was a game, a way to help their mother. She preyed on their innocence and their love for her, twisting their young minds to suit her own selfish purposes. These early forays into crime were a prelude to something far more sinister. They marked the beginning of Genevieve's descent into darkness, a descent fueled by greed, ambition, and a chilling disregard for human life. A decade after the birth of Fabrice and Valerie, Geneviève reinvented herself as a television installer. She found work equipping public buildings, including a local psychiatric hospital. It was here that she would encounter Eric Devriès, the man who would become both her lover and her ultimate target. Eric was a patient at the hospital, suffering from severe depression and anxiety. He was the son of a wealthy banker, and he made no secret of his privileged background. He drove a flashy Ferrari, wore designer clothes, and flaunted his wealth at every opportunity. Geneviève, with her keen eye for opportunity, recognized Eric as a potential ticket to financial security. She struck up a conversation with him, feigning sympathy for his struggles and admiration for his lifestyle. Eric, starved for affection and attention, was immediately drawn to Genevieve's charm and flattery. He confided in her about his troubled past, his strained relationship with his family, and his deep-seated insecurities. Geneviève listened patiently, offering words of comfort and understanding. She made him feel seen and valued, something he had rarely experienced in his life. As their relationship deepened, Geneviève began to manipulate Eric, subtly planting seeds of doubt and suspicion in his mind. She told him that his friends were only interested in his money, that his family was trying to control him, and that she was the only person he could truly trust. Eric, increasingly isolated and vulnerable, fell completely under Genevieve's spell. He began to rely on her for everything, seeking her advice on financial matters, confiding in her about his personal problems, and even cutting off contact with his family and friends at her urging. Geneviève, emboldened by her success, began to plot her next move. She realized that Eric's wealth could be hers, if only she could find a way to get rid of René. She confessed her affair to René, hoping to provoke him into a divorce. She flaunted her relationship with Eric, bragging about his wealth and his generosity. She made it clear that she no longer loved him and that she wanted to be with Eric. But René, steadfast in his commitment to his children, refused to give her what she wanted. He was willing to endure her infidelity, to swallow his pride, if it meant protecting his children from the trauma of a broken home. Geneviève, enraged by René's stubbornness, decided to take matters into her own hands. She placed an ad in a local newspaper, seeking a courier. She wasn't interested in delivering packages. She was looking for someone to assassinate her husband. She interviewed several candidates, carefully assessing their desperation and their willingness to commit violence. She finally settled on a homeless man, a drifter with nothing to lose and everything to gain. She told the man that René was abusive and that she was living in constant fear for her life. She offered him 300,000 francs, a small fortune to someone living on the streets. The man agreed to the terms, eager to escape his impoverished existence. Geneviève provided the man with René's address and place of work, along with a detailed description of his appearance. She instructed him to wait for René outside his office, follow him home, and then kill him. The man followed Genevieve's instructions, but he was ultimately unable to carry out the act. He couldn't bring himself to take another human life. He panicked and fled, abandoning his plan. The next morning, the police arrived at Genevieve's door. The homeless man had turned himself in, confessing everything. Geneviève was arrested and charged with attempted murder. During the interrogation, Geneviève initially denied any involvement in the plot. But when confronted with the homeless man's testimony, she broke down and confessed. She claimed that she had only wanted to scare René, to teach him a lesson. She said that she had never intended for him to be hurt. She pleaded for leniency, begging the police to believe that she was a good person who had made a terrible mistake. René, despite his anger and betrayal, refused to press charges. He couldn't bring himself to send his wife to prison, especially knowing the devastating impact it would have on his children. Without René's cooperation, the police were forced to release Geneviève. She walked free, her conscience clear, her thirst for power undiminished. The years that followed were a whirlwind of schemes and manipulations. Geneviève continued to see Eric, all the while searching for new ways to amass wealth and power. She defrauded the retirement system, collecting her deceased father's pension for years after his death. She forged signatures, falsified documents, and lied to government officials. She was eventually caught, but she somehow managed to evade prosecution. Her charm, her cunning, and her willingness to exploit the weaknesses of others allowed her to escape justice time and time again. In 1996, Geneviève finally divorced René, leaving him financially ruined and emotionally devastated. She moved in with Eric, taking her children with her. They settled into a luxurious villa in Antibes, living a life of opulence and excess. Eric, increasingly dependent on Geneviève, lavished her with gifts and attention. He bought her expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and exotic vacations. He made her the center of his world, showering her with adoration and praise. But beneath the surface of their idyllic existence, a dark undercurrent of tension began to emerge. Eric's mental health continued to deteriorate, and he became increasingly erratic and unpredictable. He suffered from violent mood swings, alternating between moments of intense affection and explosive rage. He accused Geneviève of cheating on him, of spending his money frivolously, and of plotting to steal his fortune. Geneviève, who had initially viewed Eric as a means to an end, now found herself trapped in a volatile and potentially dangerous situation. She couldn't leave him, because she knew that she would lose everything. But she also couldn't continue to live with him, because she feared for her safety and the safety of her children. She began to contemplate drastic measures, considering ways to eliminate Eric without raising suspicion. She knew that she couldn't afford to make another mistake. The next time, she had to be certain. She turned to her sons, Fabrice and Valerie, who were now teenagers. She confided in them about Eric's abuse, exaggerating his violence and painting him as a threat to their well-being. She manipulated them into believing that the only way to protect themselves was to kill Eric. She suggested that they stage a hunting accident, making it appear as if Eric had been accidentally shot. Fabrice and Valerie were horrified by their mother's suggestion. They loved Eric, despite his flaws, and they couldn't imagine harming him. But Geneviève was relentless, preying on their fears and insecurities. She reminded them of the difficult childhood they had endured, of the sacrifices she had made for them, and of the importance of family loyalty. She convinced them that they had no choice, that they had to do what was necessary to protect their mother and themselves. One weekend, Eric and the twins went hunting in the nearby hills. The children were armed with small pellet guns, ostensibly for shooting birds. Geneviève had carefully planned every detail, ensuring that the opportunity for an accident would present itself. As they walked through the woods, Fabrice and Valerie exchanged nervous glances. They knew what their mother wanted them to do, but they were struggling to go through with it. Eric, oblivious to their inner turmoil, chatted happily about the beauty of nature and the thrill of the hunt. He was a changed man, his violent outbursts replaced by moments of lucidity and genuine affection. Fabrice finally summoned the courage to act. He raised his pellet gun, pointed it at the back of Eric's head, and pulled the trigger. The pellet struck Eric with a soft thud. He cried out in pain, clutching his head. Fabrice, horrified by what he had done, dropped the gun and ran away. Eric survived the attack, suffering only a minor injury. The pellet had barely pierced his skin. But the incident served as a wake-up call for Valerie and Fabrice. They realized that their mother was serious about killing Eric, and they knew that they had to do something to stop her. Years went by, filled with increasingly desperate measures. Eric's health continued to decline, and he spent more and more time in the hospital. Geneviève saw an opportunity to cash in on his life insurance policies. She manipulated her sons again, promising them a share of the insurance money if they helped her kill Eric. Valerie refused to participate, but Fabrice, desperate for money to fuel his drug addiction, agreed to find someone else to do the job. He recruited Yen Bei, a friend from the squad who was also a heroin addict. Geneviève, knowing Yan's vulnerability and his need for money, seduced him with promises of a better life. She told him that Eric was abusive, that he deserved to die, and that killing him would be an act of mercy. She convinced Yan that he was doing the right thing, that he was helping her and her children. The plan was simple. Yan would cause a car accident, making it appear as if Eric had been hit by a drunk driver. Geneviève would collect the insurance money, and they would all live happily ever after. On November 1st, 1992, Yen followed Eric as he biked through the darkened streets of Antibes. He waited for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to strike. As Eric turned down a narrow, dimly lit lane, Yen accelerated, slamming into him with full force. Eric was thrown from his bicycle, his body crashing onto the pavement. Yen sped away, leaving Eric lying on the street, his lifeblood seeping into the cold asphalt. He felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly overshadowed by the promise of money and freedom. Geneviève, upon hearing the news, pretended to be devastated. She rushed to the hospital, weeping and wailing. She played the grieving widow to perfection, fooling everyone with her act. But beneath the surface, she was filled with a cold, calculating satisfaction. Her plan had worked. Eric was dead, and she was about to become a very wealthy woman. She visited Eric in the hospital every day, putting on a show for the doctors and nurses. But in her heart, she knew that he was already gone. When Eric finally succumbed to his injuries, Geneviève wasted no time in filing a claim for his life insurance policies. She was confident that she would receive the money, that she would finally achieve the financial security she had always craved, but she had underestimated the insurance companies. They grew suspicious of her sudden wealth and launched an investigation into Eric's death. The investigators discovered that Geneviève had been forging Eric's signature on the life insurance policies. They also learned about her past crimes and her history of violence. The police reopened the case, this time focusing on Geneviève as the prime suspect. They gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pieced together the truth about her deadly plot. In 2003, Geneviève Montillet stood trial for the murder of Eric Devriès. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her sons testified against her, recounting the years of abuse and manipulation they had endured. Yen Bei confessed to the crime, admitting that he had been paid by Geneviève to kill Eric. The insurance investigators presented their findings, proving that Geneviève had forged Eric's signature on the life insurance policies. The jury found Geneviève guilty of murder and sentenced her to 25 years in prison. She protested her innocence to the end, but her lies were finally exposed. Fabrice and Yen received lighter sentences, given their cooperation with the authorities and their youth at the time of the crime. Valerie was acquitted, having refused to participate in the plot. Geneviève died in prison in 2010, alone and unrepentant. Her legacy was one of greed, betrayal, and destruction. She had destroyed her family in her relentless pursuit of wealth, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and shattered dreams. I hope this expanded version provides a richer and more satisfying experience.